Imagine a small boy trudging along a dusty road, his tiny feet bare against the hot pavement, small shoulders hunched under the weight of a tattered backpack as cars speed past without slowing. Then one morning, as 7-year-old Michael makes his daily 3-mile journey to school with cracked, bleeding soles, a shiny black SUV pulls alongside him and stops. The window rolls down to reveal a face that will change everything about this child's desperate situation. What happens? Next is a story of compassion that began with a simple question, but turned into a journey that would transform not just one child's life, but an entire community's understanding of the invisible struggles happening right before their eyes. Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness start with simply noticing what others have driven past. Before we continue this heartwarming true story that will restore your faith in humanity, please subscribe to our channel right now so you never miss another tale of everyday heroes making extraordinary differences in the lives of those who need it most. The alarm clock rarely worked, but Michael didn't need it. His body knew when to wake, just before sunrise, when the room was still dark and the air held the chill of night. He moved quietly, careful not to wake his grandmother, who needed every minute of rest she could get. Her coughing had been worse lately, each ragged breath a reminder of how fragile their situation was. 7 years old and already carrying responsibilities that would weigh heavy on an adult, Michael had developed a careful morning routine. He washed his face in the bathroom sink where the cold water only sometimes worked. He dressed in the cleanest clothes from his meager collection, today a faded blue t-shirt 2 sizes too big, and khaki shorts with a frayed hem. Breakfast was whatever he could find. This morning, the last slice of bread with a thin scraping of peanut butter. Before leaving, he checked on Grandma Elaine. Her medication bottles lined the small bedside table, each one representing bills they couldn't afford but couldn't live without. He made sure her water glass was full and her phone was within reach. "I'm going to school now, Grandma," he whispered, though he knew she was still asleep. Outside, the first rays of sun were just breaking over the horizon. Their small, dilapidated house sat at the edge of Pinewood Estates, a grand name for Eastchester, a neighborhood that had seen better days decades ago. The 3-mile journey to Eastside Elementary stretched ahead of him, a daily gauntlet that began with gravel roads and continued along increasingly busy streets. Michael looked down at his bare feet, already tough from months without shoes. His last pair, donated by the church before it closed its charity program, had fallen apart 2 months ago. The soles had separated from the uppers, and no amount of tape could keep them together anymore. Grandma had cried when he showed her, promising to find money for new ones somehow, but Michael knew there was nothing left after her medicine. He began to walk, the familiar sting of rough terrain against his soles. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. September in this part of the country meant lingering summer heat that turned asphalt into a griddle by mid-morning. Michael had learned to walk on the edges of the road where occasional patches of grass offered brief relief. Cars began to pass as he reached the main road, first just a few, then a steady stream of morning commuters. Some drivers didn't notice him at all, focused on coffee cups and radio dials. Others saw but quickly looked away, uncomfortable with the sight of a barefoot child, but not enough to stop. Occasionally, someone would slow down, and Michael would feel a momentary hope rise in his chest, only to have it fade as they drove on. The worst part of the journey was the quarter-mile stretch past the shopping center, where broken glass and discarded metal frequently left new cuts on his feet. He had developed a mental map of hazards to avoid, but new ones appeared daily. This morning, he carefully navigated around a shattered beer bottle, only to step on a hidden metal tab that sliced into his heel. He bit his lip, refusing to cry, as blood welled up from the fresh wound. By the time the school came into view, Michael's feet were covered in a fine layer of dust mixed with small spots of blood. He stopped at the outdoor water fountain as he always did, using his hands to wash away the visible evidence of his journey. The last thing he wanted was more attention from teachers, or worse, the pitying stares of classmates. Mrs. Jenkins, the kind-hearted crossing guard, gave him her usual sad smile. "Morning, Michael." "Morning, ma'am," he replied politely, eyes down. "Got your homework done?" Michael nodded. Homework was never a problem. The quiet hours after school, when Grandma was resting, were perfect for studying. Education was his way out, Grandma always said. The path to a better life than this. The first bell rang, and Michael joined the stream of children entering the building. He walked carefully, trying to make his bare feet less noticeable among the sneakers, sandals, and boots that surrounded him. Most days he succeeded in blending in, sitting at the back of classrooms with his feet tucked under his chair, avoiding activities that would draw attention to his lack of shoes. "Hey, Barefoot!" The whispered taunt came from Tyler, a fourth grader with expensive shoes and a keen eye for weakness. "Did your shoes run away 'cause your feet smell?" Michael kept walking, face burning with shame but expression carefully neutral. Showing reaction only made the teasing worse. Inside his classroom, Michael took his usual seat by the window. Ms. Thompson, his second-grade teacher, glanced at his bare feet but said nothing. She had tried to help once, bringing a pair of old sneakers she thought might fit, but the principal had warned her about giving special treatment to specific students. Instead, she found other ways to support him. Extra snacks left casually on his desk, gentle praise for his consistently excellent work, and a blind eye to his shoeless state. Morning lessons began with mathematics, Michael's favorite subject. Numbers made sense in a way people often didn't. They followed reliable rules and gave consistent answers when you treated them right. He lost himself in the worksheet of addition and subtraction problems, momentarily forgetting the throbbing in his feet. At recess, while other children raced across the playground, Michael found his usual spot under the oak tree with a library book. The librarian, Mrs. Vargas, always helped him find new ones, never mentioning the fact that he was the only child who spent every recess reading instead of playing. Today's book was about space exploration, rockets and astronauts, and the incredible journey to the moon. Michael absorbed the information hungrily, imagining a world far beyond dusty roads and painful walks. Lunch brought its own challenges. The free lunch program provided his main meal of the day, but it also meant standing in the free lunch line, another marker of difference. He ate quickly, focusing on getting every bit of nutrition from the meal that needed to sustain him through the afternoon and the long walk home. In art class, the final period of the day, they were making self-portraits. Michael carefully drew himself with shoes, bright blue sneakers like the ones he'd seen in a store window. Ms. Garcia, the art teacher, paused behind him, noting the addition. "Those are wonderful shoes, Michael," she said softly. "For his ears only." "I like how you colored them." "Thank you," he replied, adding more detail to the imaginary footwear. On paper, at least, his feet didn't hurt. The dismissal bell always brought mixed feelings. Relief to be free from navigating the social complexities of school, dread for the long, painful journey ahead. Michael gathered his few supplies into his battered backpack and prepared himself for the return trip, knowing that tomorrow he would do it all again. No one saw the small grimace of pain as he took his first steps outside the school building. No one noticed him pause to examine a new blister forming on his right foot. In a world full of busy, distracted people, a barefoot boy had become practically invisible. But tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, someone would finally see him. James Wilson was running late. His morning routine had been disrupted by an unexpected call from a supplier, pushing back his departure by 15 minutes. Now he guided his black SUV through the familiar streets toward his furniture store downtown. mentally reorganizing his day to accommodate the delay. At 42, James had built a comfortable life. Wilson's fine furnishings had grown from a small storefront to the largest home goods retailer in the county. Hard work and smart decisions had earned him respect in the business community and provided well for his wife Sarah and their teenage daughter Emma. They lived in the kind of neighborhood where people didn't think twice about having everything they needed. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, a small figure on the roadside caught his attention. A young boy walking alone. Something about the child's solitary journey had registered in James's peripheral awareness the past 2 mornings as well. Today, running later than usual, their paths crossed at a different point, giving James a clearer view. The boy was small, probably 1st or 2nd grade, with a worn backpack almost as big as his thin frame. But what made James slow down was the realization that the child had no shoes, no sneakers, no sandals, not even socks, just bare feet on the hot pavement. James frowned, checking his rearview mirror as he continued driving. Children in this community didn't go without shoes. This wasn't that kind of place, or at least, he had never thought it was. For the next quarter mile, as the road wound toward downtown, an internal debate raged in James's mind. He was already late. It wasn't his business. Someone else would surely help. Probably the boy had shoes and just wasn't wearing them. Kids did strange things sometimes, but the image of those small, bare feet stayed with him, along with the memory that he'd seen the same child walking the previous days. Something wasn't right. With a decisive motion, James made a U-turn at the next intersection and drove back, slowing as he approached the boy. He pressed the button to lower his passenger window. "Hey there," he called, keeping his tone friendly, but not too familiar. "Are you heading to school?" The boy stopped, instinctively stepping back from the road. Wariness clouded his young face, a look that seemed too mature for his years. "Yes, sir," he answered politely, though his body language remained guarded. James noticed the child's feet were dirty and calloused, with what appeared to be small cuts on the heels and toes. This wasn't a one-time shoeless adventure. This was habitual. "I'm headed that direction," James said, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Would you like a ride? It's getting pretty hot out already." The boy hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. Stranger danger warnings battled with the reality of his painful journey. "My grandma says I shouldn't get in cars with people." "I don't know," he finally replied. James nodded, respecting the response. "Your grandma's absolutely right. That's very smart." He reached for his wallet and extracted a business card. "My name is James Wilson. I own Wilson's Furniture Store downtown. You can see my picture right there on the card." He extended the card through the window. After a moment's hesitation, the boy stepped forward and took it, studying the photo, and "Text carefully. I'm Michael," the boy offered quietly. "Nice to meet you, Michael. Listen, I understand if you don't want to ride, but can I ask you something? Where are your shoes?" Michael looked down, a flush of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "Don't have any," he mumbled, almost inaudibly. The simple admission hung in the morning air between them. James felt something twist in his chest, a mixture of shock and sadness that a child in his community could be walking miles to school barefoot. "Oh, they broke," Michael added, as if feeling the need to explain further. "Grandma's going to get me new ones soon." James nodded, careful to keep pity from his expression. There was dignity in the way Michael held himself, despite everything, and James instinctively knew not to damage it. "It happens," he said casually. "You know, my store is right by East Side Elementary. I drive this way every morning. If you ever wanted a ride to school, I'd be happy to help out. Completely up to you." Michael shifted his weight, wincing slightly as he adjusted his stance on a fresh cut. The pain seemed to tip the balance of his decision. "Okay," he said finally. "Just to school." "Just to school," James confirmed, reaching across to open the passenger door. "You can put your backpack on the floor there." Michael climbed in carefully, his small body barely making an impression on the leather seat. He kept his feet hovering above the floor mat, aware of the dirt they would leave. "It's okay," James assured him, noticing the gesture. "That's what floor mats are for." As they drove, James maintained a light conversation, asking about Michael's grade and teacher without pushing for more personal information. The boy's responses were polite but brief, his body tense with the wariness of someone unaccustomed to kindness without conditions. "Miss Thompson's class?" "She taught my daughter Emma a few years ago." "Great teacher," James commented, keeping his eyes on the road to help Michael feel less scrutinized. "She's nice," Michael agreed, offering his longest response yet. "She helps me with extra math sometimes." "You like math?" Michael nodded, a hint of enthusiasm breaking through his caution. "Numbers make sense. They don't change the rules suddenly." The simple observation carried a weight of wisdom beyond the boy's years, making James wonder what experiences had taught a 7-year-old such a lesson about consistency and disappointment. As they approached the school, James noticed Michael's posture becoming more anxious. He realized the boy might be concerned about being seen arriving in a stranger's expensive vehicle. "Would you prefer I drop you a little before the entrance?" he asked. Relief flashed across Michael's face. "Yes, please. At the corner is good." James pulled over at the indicated spot, far enough from the main entrance to avoid drawing attention but still on school property. Before Michael could exit, James made a decision. "Michael, I drive this way every morning around this time. If you'd like a ride tomorrow, I could meet you at the corner of Maple and Pine at 7:30. Totally up to you. No pressure at all." Michael paused, hand on the door handle. "Why?" he asked simply. The directness of the question caught James off guard. Why indeed? He hadn't planned this, hadn't woken up intending to get involved in a stranger's life. Yet, here he was, unable to ignore what he'd seen. "Because it seems like you could use a break for your feet," he answered honestly. "And it's no trouble for me since I'm headed this way anyway." Michael studied him with eyes that seemed to assess the truth of the statement, weighing it against what must have been many broken promises in his young life. "Okay," he finally said. "Maple and Pine, 7:30. With that, he slipped out of the SUV and walked toward the school building, his small shoulders straight despite the pain each step must have caused. James watched until Michael was safely inside, then sat motionless behind the wheel, the encounter replaying in his mind. What he'd just witnessed challenged his understanding of his own community. How many other Michaels were out there, invisible until someone happened to truly look? His phone buzzed with a text from his store manager wondering about his delay. The day's responsibilities called, but James knew with absolute certainty that he would be at Maple and Pine tomorrow at 7:30, and he wouldn't be coming empty-handed. The house at 317 Oakwood Lane had once been charming. Built in the 1960s, when Pinewood Estates was a promising middle-class development, it featured the ranch-style architecture popular in that era. But decades of deferred maintenance had transformed it into a shadow of its former self. Paint peeled from weathered siding, gutters sagged precariously, and the small front yard had surrendered to weeds years ago. Inside, 7-year-old Michael moved quietly through the afternoon routine he had perfected through necessity. He placed his backpack carefully on the kitchen table, one of the few surfaces not cluttered with medication bottles, past due notices, and the miscellaneous debris of struggling to survive. From the refrigerator, he retrieved a pitcher of tap water and filled 2 glasses, adding ice to one. "Grandma," he called softly, approaching the small bedroom off the main living area. "I'm home." Elaine Foster sat propped against pillows, her bed an oxygen tube running beneath her nose, connected to the concentrator that hummed constantly beside her. At 67, she looked much older, her body ravaged by the combination of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and the stress of raising a grandchild on a fixed income that barely covered her medical needs. "There's my boy," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "How was school today?" Michael handed her the glass with ice. knowing the cool water helped soothe her throat. "It was good. I got an A on my spelling test." Pride flickered across Elaine's tired face. "That's my smart boy. Always knew you had your mother's brains." The mention of his mother brought the familiar ache to Michael's chest, though he'd learned to hide it well. He had few memories of Amanda Foster, just fragments of a laugh, the scent of drugstore perfume. And finally, the night 3 years ago when she'd kissed him goodbye, promising to return after finding work in the city. That promise, like so many others, had dissolved into the complicated reality of addiction and desperation that had ultimately claimed her life. Elaine noticed the shadow cross her grandson's face. "Did you have enough to eat at lunch?" she asked. Changing the subject. "Yes, ma'am," Michael answered automatically, though the school lunch had been small and he was already hungry again. He would wait until dinner to eat the last can of soup in the pantry, making sure they shared it equally. He settled into the worn armchair beside the bed, opening his backpack to begin homework while keeping his grandmother company. This was their afternoon ritual, Michael working on schoolwork while Elaine rested, the two of them connected by soft conversation and the shared understanding of their precarious situation. "My feet got pretty cut up today," Michael mentioned casually, not wanting to worry her but needing to explain the bloodstains on his socks, which he'd put on at school after receiving a clean pair from the sympathetic janitor. Elaine's face crumpled, with a mixture of sorrow and shame. "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry. I called about that church donation program again, but they're not doing shoes until winter." She twisted the thin gold band she still wore on her left hand, her last possession, of any value but one she refused to sell. "Maybe I could try to make you some coverings from that old blanket." "It's okay, Grandma," Michael assured her quickly, hating to see her distress. "I'm tough." And he hesitated, unsure how she would react to his news. "Someone gave me a ride to school today." Elaine's expression immediately shifted to concern. "A ride? Michael, we've talked about strangers." "He wasn't really a stranger," Michael interrupted, pulling out the business card James had given him. "He owns a furniture store. He saw me walking and asked about my shoes." Elaine took the card, studying it with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. Like many who have faced hardship, she had developed a protective skepticism about unexpected kindness, yet couldn't entirely extinguish the hope that help might come. "He said he could give me rides to school because he goes that way anyway," Michael explained. "I'm going to meet him tomorrow morning." Elaine handed the card back, conflict evident in her expression. "I don't know, Michael. People don't usually help without wanting something." The cynicism in her statement reflected years of disappointment. Once a skilled nurse's aide, Elaine had lost her job when Michael's mother abandoned him, forcing her to become his full-time guardian. By the time she'd arranged for appropriate childcare, her position had been filled, and her increasingly severe COPD made finding new employment impossible. They had fallen through every crack in the system, too proud to beg and too overwhelmed to navigate the labyrinthine social services that might have helped. "He seemed nice," Michael offered, "like Ms. Thompson. Some people are just nice, right?" The simple question hung in the air between them, a child's hope battling against an elder's hard-earned caution. Finally, Elaine sighed. "You can meet him tomorrow, but at the bus stop where people can see you, not on some corner. And you call me from the school office when you arrive, you hear me?" Michael nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am." The conversation shifted to other matters. The electricity bill that had arrived with a disconnection warning, the prescription that needed refilling but would have to wait until the Social Security check arrived next week. The neighbor who had promised to bring over some vegetables from her garden. As evening approached, Michael heated the can of soup on their ancient stove, carefully dividing it between two bowls, adding extra crackers to his grandmother's portion while claiming he wasn't very hungry. They ate together in the small bedroom, Michael perched on the edge of the bed while a decades-old television played the local news in the background. Social services called again, Elaine mentioned between slow, careful spoonfuls. Asking about your school attendance, Michael tensed. School attendance had been an issue last winter when he'd missed several days due to bronchitis, unable to make the long walk in freezing temperatures. The subsequent visit from a concerned social worker had terrified them both with the unspoken threat of separation if Elaine was deemed unable to provide adequate care. "I haven't missed any days," he assured her. "Ms. Thompson even gave me a perfect attendance sticker last week," Elaine nodded, relieved. "Good. That's good." She set aside her half-eaten soup, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "We just need to keep going as we are. Something will work out." But the hollow tone of her voice betrayed her lack of conviction. They had been keeping going for 3 years now, and things had only gotten harder. Elaine's health had deteriorated, their resources had dwindled, and the small house continued its slow decay around them. After ensuring his grandmother had taken her evening medications, Michael helped her settle for the night. He read aloud from a library book about ancient Egypt, transporting them both to a world far from their troubles, until Elaine's eyes grew heavy. "You're a good boy, Michael," she murmured as sleep began to claim her. "You deserve so much better than this." "We're okay, Grandma," he replied with the resilience that had become his hallmark. "I'll wake you for your midnight medicine." In the quiet kitchen, Michael washed their few dishes and prepared his clothes for the morning. His thoughts turned to James Wilson and the promised ride. Despite his grandmother's warnings, something about the man had seemed trustworthy. Perhaps the directness of his gaze or the way he hadn't flinched from Michael's poverty. As he crawled onto the pull-out couch that served as his bed, Michael allowed himself a small, cautious hope. Not for grand rescue or dramatic change, but simply for a ride that would spare his feet another day of pain. In his experience, hope was a dangerous luxury, but tonight, just this once, he permitted himself its comfort as he drifted into exhausted sleep. James arrived at the bus stop 20 minutes early, his SUV idling as he scanned the morning shadows for Michael's small figure. After yesterday's encounter, he had gone directly to Walker's department store and purchased 3 pairs of sneakers in different sizes, unsure of what would fit. Alongside the shoes, he'd selected socks, a backpack to replace the tattered one, and basic school supplies, notebooks, pencils, erasers, and a pencil case. Sarah had noticed the purchases when he brought them home. "New hobby I don't know about?" she'd asked with gentle humor, eyeing the child-sized items. James had explained then, the words tumbling out with unexpected emotion. The barefoot boy, the painful journey to school, the quiet dignity despite obvious poverty. Sarah had listened, without interrupting, her expression softening from curiosity to concern. "You're going back tomorrow?" she'd asked when he finished. "If he shows up," James had replied. "I told him I'd meet him, but..." He'd shrugged, uncertain whether Michael would trust him enough to return. Now, watching the bus stop intently, James realized how much he wanted the boy to appear. It wasn't just about delivering the shoes and supplies. Something about Michael's situation had pierced the comfortable bubble of James's life, making him acutely aware of suffering he had previously driven past without seeing. At 7:25, Michael appeared around the corner, walking carefully on feet that seemed even more painful than the day before. James waved from the SUV, feeling a surge of relief when Michael gave a small wave in return and changed direction toward the vehicle. "Good morning," James greeted as Michael climbed in. "Thanks for meeting me." Michael nodded, settling into the passenger seat with the same careful movements as yesterday. "Grandma said to use the bus stop instead of the corner," he explained. "Seriously? Your grandma's right." That was a smart change, James agreed, pulling away from the curb. Safety first. They drove in silence for a moment before James gestured to the shopping bags in the back seat. "I picked up some things yesterday that my daughter doesn't need anymore. I thought maybe you could use them." Michael turned to look at the bags, wariness and hope battling in his expression. What things? Well, there are some shoes that might fit you, school supplies, that sort of stuff. Just extras we had around the house, James lied, trying to frame the gifts in a way that wouldn't wound the boy's pride. You're welcome to take what you can use. Michael remained quiet, his young mind clearly processing this unexpected development. Finally, he asked in a small voice, "Why are you being nice?" To me, the direct question caught James off guard again. There was something disarming about the child's straightforwardness, as if life had stripped away his ability to engage in social pretense. Because, James began, then decided honesty was the only appropriate response. Because I saw you were hurting, and I could do something about it. Sometimes it's that simple. Michael absorbed this, then nodded, as if accepting the explanation. "Thank you," he said formally. At the school, James pulled into a parking space rather than dropping Michael off at the corner. "Let's see if any of these shoes fit before you go in," he suggested. "No point in carrying them if they don't work." He brought the bags to the front seat, and Michael tentatively explored their contents. His eyes widened at the brand new sneakers, simple but good quality, in white, blue, and black. "Try them on," James encouraged. "See which ones feel best." With careful movements, Michael slipped his dirty, cut feet into the white sneakers. They were slightly too large, but when he tried the blue pair, his face lit up with surprise. "They fit," he said, a rare smile transforming his serious features. "Great! Why don't you wear those today, and we'll keep the others for when you grow," James suggested. "And here, these socks will make them more comfortable." Michael removed the shoes to put on the socks first, revealing the full extent of his injured feet. James suppressed a wince at the cuts, blisters, and calluses that mapped the boy's daily suffering. Once the socks and shoes were properly in place, Michael flexed his feet experimentally, wonder spreading across his face at the cushioned protection. "They feel," he seemed to search for the right word, "soft." James helped Michael transfer his school materials to the new backpack, noting how few supplies the boy actually had. A single pencil worn to a nub, a composition book with most pages already filled, and a reading book from the school library. The new supplies were received with the same mixture of disbelief and cautious joy. "I can't take all this," Michael finally said, looking overwhelmed. "It's too much." "It's not too much," James assured him. "Really, it's okay. Consider it." He paused, then finished. "Consider it payment for keeping me company on my morning drive. Gets lonely in the car sometimes." This framing seemed to make Michael more comfortable, offering him a way to accept help without feeling like charity. They walked together to the school entrance, Michael stepping with a new confidence in his protected feet. "I'll meet you here after school," James said as they reached the doors. "Give you a ride home too, if that's okay." Michael looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "You want to know where I live?" The question carried layers of meaning. Vulnerability, caution, and perhaps a test of James's intentions. James nodded seriously. "I'd like to meet your grandmother, if that's all right. She might have questions about who's driving her grandson around." Michael considered this, then nodded slowly. "She's sick," he warned. "She has to use oxygen, and she coughs a lot." "I understand," James replied. "What time does school finish?" 3:00. "I'll be here." The school day passed in a blur for Michael. His teachers noticed the new shoes and backpack, but tactfully avoided drawing attention to them. Only Mrs. Thompson made a quiet comment as she passed his desk during math. "Nice shoes, Michael. They look very comfortable." "They are," he replied, still marveling at how different it felt to walk without pain. At lunch, he found an extra sandwich and apple in his new backpack, with a note that simply read, "Thought you might be hungry." The unexpected food nearly brought tears to his eyes, not just for the meal itself, but for the thoughtfulness behind it. When the final bell rang, Michael felt an unfamiliar mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Would James really be waiting? And what would Grandma say about a stranger coming to their rundown house? Yet there was the black SUV, exactly where promised, with James leaning against the passenger door. Seeing Michael, he straightened and waved. "Good day at school?" he asked as Michael approached. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the lunch." "You didn't have to do that," James smiled. "I'm glad you found it. Ready to head home?" As they drove, Michael provided quiet directions, his anxiety increasing as they left the well-maintained neighborhoods behind and entered the declining streets of Pinewood Estates. He watched James carefully for signs of judgment as the houses became more dilapidated, but the man's expression remained neutral. "It's this one," Michael finally said, pointing to the small ranch house with its peeling paint and overgrown yard. James parked in the cracked driveway, taking in the property. With a quick, assessing glance, "Nice big oak tree," he commented, focusing on the one feature that retained its dignity. Michael led the way to the front door, pausing before opening it. "Remember what I said about Grandma?" he cautioned. "I remember," James assured him, following the boy into a home that would change everything he thought he understood about his community and himself. Elena Vasquez of the Riverdale Gazette approached her interview with Elaine and Michael Foster with uncommon sensitivity. After James had carefully broached the subject, Elaine had agreed to speak with the reporter under specific conditions. No photographs of Michael, no mention of their full names, and final approval of the article before publication. "I'm not looking to create a spectacle," Elena assured them as she sat in their living room, recorder placed discreetly on the coffee table. "I want to help our readers understand the challenges some of our neighbors face, challenges that often go unseen." Over the course of an hour, Elaine shared parts of their story, her daughter's struggles, taking on guardianship of Michael, the cascade of health and financial difficulties that had followed. She spoke with dignity, neither minimizing their hardships nor presenting herself as a victim. Michael, sitting close to his grandmother, occasionally added details from his perspective. The long walks to school, the efforts to hide his circumstances from classmates, the careful calculations about food and necessities that no child should have to make. "The worst part isn't even going without things," Elaine explained, her voice strengthening as she addressed systemic issues rather than personal circumstances. "It's the impossible choices, medicine or heat, food or electricity, and the barriers to getting help, forms you can't understand, offices you can't reach without transportation, phone systems that keep you on hold for hours when your oxygen tank is running low." Elena's article, published the following Sunday, was titled "Invisible Struggles: The Gaps in Our Community Safety Net." It presented the Fosters' situation as one example within a broader examination of how working families and elderly residents were falling through the cracks in Riverdale. Factual but compassionate, it avoided sensationalism while making the reality of these challenges impossible to ignore. The community response was immediate and mixed. Most readers expressed shock and concern, with many contacting the Gazette asking how to help. Others questioned why people didn't just get jobs, or suggested that such struggles were the result of poor choices, comments that revealed profound misunderstandings about the complex realities of poverty, illness, and limited opportunity. At school, Michael experienced the uncomfortable sensation of suddenly becoming visible after years of careful anonymity. Though the article had used pseudonyms, the circumstances were specific enough that teachers and some students made the connection. "Is that article about you and your grandma?" Tyler, his former tormentor, asked during lunch period, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Michael froze, sandwich halfway to his mouth, as several heads turned in his direction. "My mom says your grandma should get a job instead of asking for handouts," Tyler continued, the cruelty of children who repeat adult prejudices without understanding them. Before Michael could respond, Emma Wilson appeared beside their table. At 13, James's daughter was 6 years older than Michael and part of the middle school that shared the cafeteria with the elementary grades. "My dad says your grandma used to take care of sick people until she got sick herself," Emma said clearly, placing herself between Michael and Tyler. "He says she's really brave and smart. The simple intervention, not denying Michael's identity, but reframing the narrative, diffused the moment. Tyler, confronted with a respected older student, mumbled something and retreated. Emma sat down beside Michael, casually sharing her dessert as if they'd been friends for years. "Kids are stupid sometimes," she said matter-of-factly. "Just ignore Tyler. He's just repeating what his parents say, and they're wrong." Michael studied her, trying to understand why James's daughter would defend him. "Do you and your dad talk about me?" he finally asked. Emma shrugged. "Sometimes. He thinks you're really smart and tough. My mom does too." She gathered her things as the bell rang. "Want to come over sometime? I have all the Harry Potter books." The casual invitation, the first Michael had received from any student, left him speechless. He managed a nod before Emma waved and headed to her next class, leaving him to process this unexpected alliance. At home, Elaine was experiencing her own complicated reactions to their newfound visibility. The article had prompted an outpouring of support, with offers of help arriving daily. James and Sarah carefully filtered these, bringing only the most practical and respectful proposals to Elaine's attention. Still, the sudden focus on their situation created both opportunities and uncomfortable scrutiny. Mrs. Larson, from Threes, doors down, brought over a casserole, Elaine told Michael one afternoon. "Said she had no idea things were so difficult for us. We've been neighbors for 5 years, and this is the first time she's spoken to me." Her tone contained a complex mixture of appreciation, resentment, and wry observation that Michael, attuned to his grandmother's every mood, immediately understood. The help was needed and welcome, but the fact that it took a newspaper article to humanize them to their own neighbors carried its own sting. More challenging were the responses from institutions. Michael's school principal requested a meeting with Elaine, ostensibly to discuss additional resources, but with undertones of evaluating their home situation. The county social services department, which had previously been minimally involved, suddenly showed renewed interest in their case. "They're worried about liability now that everything's public," Elaine explained to James during one of his increasingly frequent visits. "If something happens to Michael while living with his sick grandmother in a deteriorating house, they'll be the ones questioned about why they didn't intervene." The fear of separation, of Michael being placed in foster care if their home was deemed unsuitable, became a constant shadow over the positive developments. Elaine had agreed to some home repairs organized through Cohen's hardware store, but resisted more comprehensive renovations that would require official inspections. James found himself in an increasingly complex position, mediating between the Fosters and well-meaning community members, advocating for them with officials while respecting their boundaries, balancing immediate aid against sustainable solutions. What had begun as giving a barefoot child rides to school had evolved into something far more intricate and consequential. "Are we helping or making things worse?" he asked Sarah late one night, after a particularly difficult conversation with Elaine about accepting certain types of assistance. Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think the answer is both. We're addressing urgent needs, which matters, but we're also disrupting a system they'd created to survive, which is naturally causing stress." "She's so afraid they'll take Michael away," James said. "And honestly, I can't promise they won't. That house has serious issues. Her health is precarious, and now everyone's watching." "Then maybe that's what we need to focus on," Sarah suggested. "Not just patching holes in their house or bringing groceries, but making sure they can stay together. That's what matters most to both of them." The wisdom in this observation clarified James's thinking. Amid all the community initiatives and growing awareness, the core issue remained protecting the bond between a vulnerable boy and the grandmother who had sacrificed everything to raise him. Any solution that threatened that bond, however well-intentioned, was no solution at all. As the Riverdale Community Support Initiative gained momentum with committee meetings and fundraising events, James kept this central truth in mind. The True measure of their success would not be statistics or publicity, but whether families like the Fosters could maintain both their basic needs and their dignity, their right to stay together, to contribute meaningfully, and to be seen as whole people rather than just problems to be solved. 1 month into their arrangement, James noticed Michael shivering as he climbed into the SUV on a particularly cold October morning. The boy wore the same thin jacket he'd had since their first meeting, clearly inadequate for the dropping temperatures. Cold. "Today, huh?" James commented casually. Turning up the heat, Michael nodded, placing his hands directly over the vents. "Grandma says it'll snow early this year. She can feel it in her joints." James made a mental note to address the winter clothing situation, but in a way that wouldn't trigger Elaine's pride or Michael's discomfort with accepting help. Over the past weeks, he'd learned that timing and approach were everything with the Fosters. That afternoon, during his weekly Chamber of Commerce meeting, James found himself sharing Michael's story with several fellow business owners as they discussed community outreach initiatives for the holidays. "There's this boy I've been giving rides to school," he began, surprised by how protective he felt as he carefully described Michael's situation without using his name. "He's just one of who knows how many kids in our town dealing with these kinds of challenges." Daniel Cohen, who owned the local hardware store, leaned forward with interest. "A barefoot kid walking miles to school and none of us noticed? Right here in Riverdale?" "That's the thing," James replied. "Once you start looking, you realize there's a whole invisible layer to our community, people falling through the cracks." Rebecca Martinez, who ran a successful bakery downtown, nodded thoughtfully. "My delivery driver mentioned an elderly woman and a young boy living in that run-down house on Oakwood. Said he worries about them when he passes by, especially with winter coming." The conversation shifted, with business owners comparing notes about pockets of need they'd observed, but never discussed collectively. By the meeting's end, something unexpected had happened. What began as James sharing Michael's story had catalyzed a broader awareness. "What if we did something coordinated?" suggested Cohen. "Not just holiday baskets, but addressing some of these systemic issues. Renovations for unsafe homes, winter clothing drives focused on specific needs?" Martinez nodded enthusiastically. "We could partner with the schools to identify the children most in need, make sure they have proper clothing, school supplies, food security." James listened, both encouraged by his colleagues' response and cautious about maintaining the Fosters' privacy and dignity. "Whatever we do needs to preserve people's self-respect," he emphasized. "No public spectacles or charity cases, just neighbors helping neighbors." The group agreed, forming an impromptu committee to develop what they tentatively called the Riverdale Community Support Initiative. James was nominated to lead it, a responsibility he accepted with mixed emotions, honored by their trust, but aware of how far beyond his expertise this venture extended. Driving home that evening, he called Sarah to share the developments. "It's like I accidentally started something," he concluded. "Now I'm somehow in charge of coordinating business owners to address poverty in Riverdale." Sarah laughed softly. "Hardly accidental, James. You've been talking about Michael and the Ashkames Fosters non-stop for weeks. This has clearly been weighing on you. I just don't want to make their situation into some public charity case," he explained. "Michael and Elaine have so much pride. If they felt like poster children for community pity, so don't structure it that way," Sarah suggested practically. "Make it about systemic change that helps many families, with the Fosters being just one of those helped." Actually, Elaine might have valuable input given her experience navigating these challenges. The suggestion struck James as brilliant, not just helping the Fosters, but involving them in creating solutions for others. It would transform them from recipients to contributors, preserving their agency and dignity. The next morning, he tentatively broached the subject with Michael during their drive. "My business group is thinking about ways to help families who might be struggling with home repairs, winter needs, that sort of thing. Do you think your grandmother might have ideas about what would be most helpful for people? Michael considered this seriously, as he did all questions. Grandma used to be a nurse's aide, he finally said. She knows lots of old people who can't get to doctor appointments. She talks about that sometimes. This insight, a specific need James hadn't considered, demonstrated exactly why involving people with lived experience was essential. Do you think she'd be willing to talk to me and some other business owners about ideas? Her perspective would be really valuable. Michael's expression brightened slightly at the suggestion that his grandmother's knowledge was valuable. I think she might, especially if it helps other people like us. That weekend, with Michael's encouragement, Elaine agreed to meet with James and a small group from the Chamber of Commerce. Though initially reserved, she gradually opened up as she realized they were genuinely seeking her expertise rather than studying her as a case of need. Transportation is the hidden barrier, she explained, her voice strengthening as she spoke about issues she understood intimately. You can have all the programs in the world, but if people can't physically get to them, especially elderly or disabled folks, they might as well not exist. Cohen nodded, taking notes. What about a volunteer driver network? Local businesses could donate fuel cards. Maybe some of us could volunteer time or employees. The discussion continued for over an hour, with Elaine growing more animated as her suggestions were taken seriously. Michael watched from the kitchen table where he was doing homework, pride evident in his expression, as his grandmother was treated as a valuable contributor rather than a charity case. As the impromptu meeting concluded, Martinez handed Elaine her business card. We're forming a community advisory group to guide this initiative. Would you consider joining? We need people with first-hand experience. The invitation visibly surprised Elaine. She glanced at Michael, then back at the business owners. I'm not sure how much help I'd be with my health and transportation issues. We could hold meetings here, James suggested, or arrange transportation. Your perspective is exactly what we need to make sure we're addressing real needs, not just what we think people need. For the first time since James had met her, Elaine's expression held something beyond weariness and worry, a spark of purpose, of being valued for her knowledge rather than pitied for her circumstances. I'll think about it, she said, but her tone suggested she was already considering the possibility. As the business owners departed, promising to return with more developed plans, James noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the foster home. A weight seemed to have lifted, not because promises of material help had been made, but because Elaine and Michael had been invited to participate in something meaningful, something that acknowledged their humanity and potential contribution. On the front porch, Martinez pulled James aside. I mentioned that family to my cousin at the Gazette. She's a reporter looking for stories about community challenges. Would they be open to talking with her? It could help raise awareness about these issues. James hesitated, protective instincts rising. Let me ask them. It would have to be handled very carefully. Their privacy and dignity are paramount. Martinez nodded understanding. Of course, just thought it might help others see what we're starting to see. That these aren't distant problems happening somewhere else. They're right here, involving real people in our own community. Driving home, James reflected on how rapidly things were evolving. What had begun with noticing one barefoot child had expanded into a community awakening, gathering momentum in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The challenge now would be ensuring that this growing initiative remained grounded in respect for the very people it aimed to help. Principal Mercer's office felt unnaturally quiet as she studied the data spread across her desk. Representatives from 5 Riverdale schools had compiled information about students showing potential signs of extreme need, children arriving hungry, inadequately dressed, or lacking basic supplies. The numbers were far higher than anyone had anticipated. 43 children identified across the district, she said. looking up at James and the small committee gathered in her office. And those are just the obvious cases. Many more are likely flying under the radar, like Michael did for so long, James nodded, both troubled by the scope and grateful for the confirmation that Michael wasn't alone in his struggles. The Riverdale Community Support Initiative had expanded rapidly over the past 3 weeks, with education now a primary focus. Today's meeting was to establish protocols for identifying and supporting children in need without stigmatizing them or violating family privacy. What patterns are you seeing? Asked Dr. Rivera, a pediatrician who had joined the committee after treating several children with health issues related to inadequate housing. Principal Mercer sighed. Food insecurity is the most common indicator. Children hoarding cafeteria, food, extreme hunger on Mondays after weekends without school meals, inability to concentrate. Clothing is next. Wearing the same items regardless of weather, missing coats in winter, shoes in poor condition. The discussions continued, with teachers and counselors sharing observations, while social workers and community representatives suggested interventions. James listened intently, connecting each abstract point to the concrete reality he witnessed daily with Michael. The key is implementation that preserves dignity, he emphasized, when the conversation turned to delivery methods. Children and families need to receive support without being identified or singled out. This principle, drawn directly from Michael and Elaine's experience, became central to the approach they developed. Discrete distribution systems for clothing and supplies, expanded food programs available to all students to avoid stigmatizing recipients, and in-school laundry facilities presented as environmental initiatives rather than poverty interventions. As the meeting concluded, Principal Mercer pulled James aside. There's something specific I wanted to discuss with you regarding Michael Foster. James tensed, protective instincts immediately activated. Is there a problem? Quite the opposite, she replied. His standardized test scores came back yesterday. He scored in the 98th percentile nationally for mathematics and the 94th for reading comprehension. These are exceptional results, especially considering the challenges he's facing. Pride swelled in James's chest, followed immediately by concern about how this information would be used. That's wonderful, but what does it mean for him practically? We'd like to recommend him for the Advanced Academic Program. It would provide enrichment opportunities, specialized instruction, potentially even scholarship tracks for college preparatory programs in the future. The possibilities were extraordinary, educational pathways that could transform Michael's future. Yet James hesitated, thinking of the complexity such an opportunity might create for a child already navigating so many challenges. Have you discussed this with his grandmother yet? Principal Mercer shook her head. I wanted to speak with you first. Given your relationship with the family, Mrs. Foster might be more receptive hearing about it from someone she trusts. The implicit recognition of James's role in Michael's life, not quite family, yet more than a casual helper, reflected the unique bonds that had formed over the past months. He agreed to discuss the advanced program with Elaine, while emphasizing that the decision would be entirely hers. Driving to the Foster home that afternoon, James found himself reflecting on how one connection had expanded to encompass so many others. What had begun with noticing a barefoot child now involved dozens of community members working to address systemic issues affecting numerous families. Michael greeted him at the door with unusual excitement. Grandma said I can go to Emma's house on Saturday to read Harry Potter, he announced, bouncing slightly on his toes, a rare display of childlike enthusiasm from the normally serious boy. James smiled, pleased by both the social development and Michael's obvious happiness. That's great. Emma's been asking when you'd visit. Inside, Elaine was having a good day, her breathing easier than usual thanks to a new medication regimen established through Dr. Rivera's intervention. She listened attentively as James shared Principal Mercer's information about Michael's test. Scores And the advanced program opportunity? Always knew he was brilliant, she said, beaming with grandmother's pride. Gets it from his mother. She was smart as a whip, too, before... She trailed off, the familiar shadow of her daughter's struggles briefly darkening her expression before she refocused. What would this program involve exactly? James explained the details Principal Mercer had provided: specialized curriculum, potential for future educational opportunities, additional resources, and support. As he spoke, he noticed Michael listening intently from his position at the kitchen table, attempting to appear absorbed in homework while clearly processing every word. "Would I have to change schools?" Michael asked finally, his voice revealing the importance of the question. "No, you'd stay at Eastside Elementary," James assured him. "You'd just have some different classes and activities." Relief showed clearly on both Foster's faces, another reminder of how precious stability was to those who had experienced its absence. After further discussion, Elaine agreed to meet with Principal Mercer to learn more, a significant step given her usual reluctance to engage with institutional authorities. As Michael returned to his homework, James and Elaine moved to the porch to continue their conversation privately. The November air was crisp, but recent weatherproofing of the house, part of the modest repairs Elaine had permitted, made the enclosed porch comfortably habitable. "There is something else I wanted to discuss," James began carefully. "The community initiative has identified quite a few other children in situations similar to Michael's." Elaine nodded, unsurprised. "Figured as much. Poverty doesn't usually target just one family in a town. We're developing programs to help, but we want to make sure we're doing it right, preserving dignity, addressing real needs rather than assumed ones." He paused, then continued, "Your insights have been invaluable. The committee was wondering if you'd consider taking on a more formal role as a consultant, with compensation for your time and expertise." Elaine's expression shifted from surprise to suspicion to cautious interest. "What kind of role exactly?" "Reviewing proposals, providing feedback from the perspective of someone who's navigated these systems, helping design approaches that actually work for families in need." James had deliberately framed the opportunity as professional rather than charitable, a genuine recognition of Elaine's knowledge and experience. "And you'd pay me for my opinions?" Her tone conveyed how rarely her perspectives had been valued in such tangible ways. "Absolutely. Your expertise is valuable. We've budgeted for consultation fees as part of the initiative's administrative costs." Elaine considered this, clearly weighing various implications. "Wouldn't be much use if I can't get to meetings," she said finally, referencing her limited mobility. "We've thought of that. Meetings could happen here, or we could arrange transportation. There's also the option of phone conferences for days when you're not feeling well enough for in-person participation." The thoroughness of these accommodations, the evidence that her potential contribution was taken seriously enough to plan around her limitations, seemed to sway Elaine more than the offer of payment. "I'd need to work around Michael's schedule," she said, which James recognized as tentative acceptance. Of course, family comes first, always. As they finalized details, James noticed Michael watching them through the window, his expression revealing awareness that something significant was happening. The boy's perceptiveness, his ability to read situations and people, was yet another reminder of the premature responsibilities he had shouldered. When James left that evening, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose. Beyond helping one remarkable child, the initiative was now creating paths for many families while recognizing the expertise of those with lived experience. It wasn't perfect. No solution to complex social problems could be, but it represented meaningful progress in a community that was finally beginning to see its invisible members. The first real cold snap of winter arrived with unexpected ferocity in early December. Temperatures plummeted overnight, transforming rain into ice and sending the community scrambling to protect pipes and plants. For homes with inadequate heating or insulation, the sudden freeze created not just discomfort but danger. At 2:17 a.m., James's phone rang, a sound that immediately sent him bolt upright in bed, heart pounding with the instinctive fear of middle-of-the-night calls. "Mr. Wilson? It's Michael." The child's voice trembled, higher than usual with barely controlled panic. "Grandma can't breathe right. The power went out and her oxygen machine stopped working." James was already pulling on clothes, signaling to Sarah what was happening. "I'm on my way, Michael. Did you call 911? "Yes, sir. They said they're coming, but there's lots of emergencies because of the ice." The practiced composure Michael typically maintained was cracking, revealing the frightened 7-year-old beneath. "She's making scary sounds." "Stay on the phone with me," James instructed, grabbing his keys and hurrying to the car where Sarah was already warming the engine. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Can you put the phone near Grandma so I can talk to her?" Movement sounds came. Through the line, then the unmistakable sound of labored breathing, the desperate wheeze of someone struggling for air. James spoke calmly to Elaine as Sarah drove through the deserted streets, assuring her that help was coming, while internally calculating how many minutes she could survive without supplemental oxygen. They arrived at the foster home simultaneously, with the ambulance lights casting eerie blue patterns across the ice-slicked yard. Paramedics moved efficiently, transferring Elaine to portable oxygen and then to a stretcher. Her lips had a bluish tinge, and her eyes reflected terror, even as she tried to focus on Michael. "The boy can't stay alone," she managed between gasping breaths. "No family." "He'll come with us," James assured her firmly, exchanging glances with Sarah, who nodded immediate agreement. "We'll take care of him until you're better." Michael stood frozen in the doorway, wearing mismatched pajamas and clutching a small backpack he'd apparently prepared. The sight, a child ready for emergency displacement, possessions already gathered, spoke volumes about previous traumatic experiences. "You're coming to our house, Michael," Sarah explained gently, kneeling to his level. "Is there anything special you need to bring? Medicine? A favorite toy?" Michael shook his head, eyes fixed on his grandmother being loaded into the ambulance. "Just my school stuff," he whispered, "and Grandma's medicine list. It's on the fridge." But so the ambulance departed with Elaine. James secured the foster home while Sarah helped Michael into their car. The boy moved with the mechanical compliance of shock, answering questions with single words, his body rigid with tension. At the Wilson home, Emma was waiting in the living room, having been awakened by the commotion. Without prompting, she approached. Michael, with the natural compassion of a child who hasn't yet learned to be awkward around others' pain. "You can have the guest room next to mine," she said, taking his backpack. "I put fresh sheets on the bed and found an extra toothbrush." Michael nodded mutely, following Emma upstairs while James and Sarah exchanged concerned glances. They had prepared for this possibility, discussed what they would do if Elaine's health created a crisis. But the reality of a traumatized child, suddenly in their care, felt overwhelming. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what they had feared. Elaine's COPD had progressed significantly, and the oxygen deprivation during the power outage had caused additional complications. She would require hospitalization for at least several days, possibly weeks. "She's stable for now," Dr. Rodriguez explained to James when he arrived at the hospital after getting Michael settled. "But I'm concerned about her returning to that house, especially in winter. The condition of the home, the unreliable electricity. It's just not sustainable for someone with her level of oxygen dependency." The assessment confirmed what James had recognized but been reluctant to articulate. The foster home, despite recent minor repairs, remained fundamentally unsafe for Elaine's medical needs. This reality created a cascade of implications. With Michael's placement at the center, what are our options? James asked, the hour unconsciously revealing how deeply he had come to feel responsible for the foster's welfare. Dr. Rodriguez sighed. Medically, she needs a facility with consistent care and reliable systems. Practically, well, that depends on insurance, finances, and what support network exists. Back at the Wilson home, Michael had finally fallen into exhausted sleep in the guest room. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, making lists and phone calls, arranging for Michael's transportation to school, informing Principal Mercer of the situation, connecting with social services to establish temporary emergency guardianship. They're sending someone to evaluate the situation tomorrow, she told James when he returned from the hospital. I emphasize that we're committed to providing care for Michael for as long as needed, but they'll still need to follow protocols. The following days unfolded in a blur of hospital visits, meetings with social workers, and establishing new routines for Michael. The boy moved through these changes with the resigned adaptation of someone who had learned early that stability was a luxury. He attended school, completed homework, and helped with household chores with meticulous care, as if proving his worthiness to remain. Only at night, when he thought no one could hear, did his composure crack. Sarah discovered this when passing his room and hearing muffled sobs. She paused, torn between respecting his privacy and offering comfort, ultimately deciding to knock gently. "Michael, may I come in?" Silence, then a small voice. "Yes, ma'am." She found him sitting cross-legged on the bed, hastily wiping tears with his sleeve. Without comment, she sat beside him, offering tissues and her presence without demands for explanation. "Is Grandma going to die?" he finally asked. The question direct in the way children cut through adult evasions. Sarah chose her words carefully. "Your grandma is very sick, and her breathing problems are serious. The doctors are doing everything they can to help her get better." Michael absorbed this, reading between the lines with his characteristic perceptiveness. "If she dies, they'll put me in foster care, won't they? Like they almost did before." The question pierced Sarah's heart. This small boy contemplating yet another loss, another displacement, with such matter-of-fact resignation. "Michael, listen to me," she said, turning to face him directly. "No matter what happens, you will not be alone. James and I would never let you go into the system. Do you understand?" He studied her face, searching for truth or deception with the wariness of a child who had learned skepticism through experience. "You'd keep me, even though I'm not your family?" "Family isn't just about who you're born to," Sarah replied, choosing her words with care. "It's about who you belong with, who takes care of you, and who you take care of in return. You have a place with us for as long as you need it." For the first time since the crisis began, Michael's rigid posture softened slightly. He didn't speak again, but when Sarah gently put her arm around his shoulders, he leaned into the embrace, allowing himself to be comforted. In the hospital, Elaine was showing marginal improvement, though doctors remained concerned about her long-term prognosis. James visited daily, bringing updates about Michael and photographs of him participating in family activities. "He's settling in okay," James assured her during one visit, helping with dishes, reading with Emma. "He even smiled a little yesterday when our dog did a silly trick." Elaine nodded weakly, oxygen tube still in place. "The social worker came," she said, her voice barely audible. "Talked about placement options for Michael. Institutional language. For taking him away." James leaned forward. "Elaine, listen to me. Sarah and I have applied for temporary guardianship. Michael will stay with us until you're well enough to care for him again. No institutions, no strangers, no system." Tears filled Elaine's eyes. "And if I don't get well enough?" The question hung between them, the fear that had shadowed their interactions from the beginning, now unavoidably present. James took Elaine's hand, his response carrying the weight of a vow. "Then he still stays with us for as long as he needs. You have my word." Christmas approached with twinkling lights and festive decorations, transforming Riverdale, creating a stark contrast to the somber reality at County Hospital, where Elaine remained under care. After 2 weeks of treatment, her condition had stabilized. Enough to begin discussions about discharge, but the question of where she would go loomed large in every conversation. "She can't return to that house," Dr. Rodriguez stated definitively during a meeting with James, Sarah, and the hospital social worker. The environment would likely trigger another crisis within days, especially in winter conditions. The social worker, Ms. Patel, nodded agreement. We've explored assisted living facilities that accept Medicare, but the waiting lists are months long, and most don't allow children as residents, which complicates the family situation. James and Sarah exchanged glances, a silent communication, born of weeks spent jointly navigating this crisis. Sarah nodded slightly, giving James permission to present the solution they had been developing. We've been renovating the in-law suite attached to our home, James explained. It was originally built for Sarah's mother, though she ultimately decided to remain in Arizona. It has a separate entrance, full accessibility features, and most importantly, a dedicated electrical system with generator backup for medical equipment. Mrs. Patel looked up from her notes with interest. You're suggesting Mrs. Foster and Michael relocate there? As a transitional solution, Sarah clarified. It would provide a safe environment for Elaine's recovery while keeping her and Michael together. They would have independence and privacy, but support available when needed. The proposal launched detailed discussions about practical considerations: medical supervision, transportation for appointments, arrangements for Michael's continued education, and Elaine's involvement in his care. Throughout these conversations, James noted how carefully Mrs. Patel evaluated not just the physical accommodations, but the interpersonal dynamics. The relationship between your families has developed rapidly, she observed. It's important to establish clear boundaries and expectations for everyone involved, especially the children. This insight led to a series of structured conversations with both Michael and Elaine about the proposed arrangement, addressing concerns and establishing parameters that would preserve the Fosters' autonomy while providing necessary support. Michael, who had been living with the Wilsons during his grandmother's hospitalization, approached these discussions with his characteristic seriousness, asking practical questions that revealed his ongoing concern about stability. "What if Grandma gets sick again?" he asked during one family meeting. "What if the power goes out?" James explained the backup generator and emergency protocols, but recognized the deeper question beneath Michael's practical inquiries. Would they stay committed if things became difficult again? Elaine's concern centered more on independence and obligation. "I won't be a charity case," she insisted during a private conversation with Sarah. "Need to contribute somehow. Pay my way. Your consulting work with the community initiative provides income," Sarah reminded her. "And once you're stronger, there will be other opportunities to contribute, if that's what you want." These discussions eventually yielded a written agreement, not legally binding, but symbolically important, outlining expectations, contributions, and boundaries for the shared living arrangement. The document acknowledged the Fosters' autonomy, while establishing practical support systems, creating a framework that respected everyone's needs and perspectives. On December 20th, Elaine was discharged from the hospital. James drove her to the Wilson home, where Michael waited anxiously on the porch despite the cold. The reunion between grandmother and grandson brought tears to even the most composed observers. Michael carefully hugging Elaine while whispering updates about school and activities, Elaine touching his face as if reassuring herself that he was really there. Sarah guided them to the in-law suite, which had been transformed in the weeks of preparation. The space was practical but welcoming. Medical equipment discreetly arranged, oxygen delivery systems installed, furniture positioned for both comfort and accessibility. Small touches personalized the space, photographs rescued from the Fosters' home, Michael's school artwork framed on walls, even the faded quilt from Elaine's bed placed carefully on the new adjustable hospital bed. "It's just temporary," Sarah emphasized, conscious of Elaine's pride, "until we figure out the next steps. But you're welcome to stay as long as needed." Elaine nodded, emotion making speech difficult. Michael moved around the space with cautious curiosity, examining the emergency call system, the specialized bathroom, fixtures, the small kitchenette with accessible features. "There's a desk for my homework," he noted, pointing to a study area equipped with school supplies and a reading lamp. "And a sofa bed for you," Sarah added, showing how the comfortable couch converted for sleeping, "though you're welcome to keep using the guest room in the main house if you prefer, especially on nights when Grandma needs extra rest." The arrangement began tentatively, with all parties navigating unfamiliar territory. Emma proved instrumental in bridging awkward moments, her straightforward acceptance setting a tone that adults sometimes struggle to achieve. She included Michael in family activities without pressure, respecting his need to be with his grandmother, while offering companionship when he seemed receptive. "Want to help decorate our tree?" she asked a few days before Christmas. "Mom always lets me put the star on top, but you can do all the middle ornaments because I'm too tall now." These small inclusions, practical rather than pitying, gradually helped Michael relax into the new situation. He developed a routine of spending mornings and evenings with Elaine, school hours in regular classes, now including the advanced program, and afternoons divided between homework, time with Emma, and household activities. For Elaine, adjustment proved more challenging. Decades of independence made accepting help difficult, even when that help was essential. She initially resisted using the emergency call system, struggled against recommended activity limitations, and attempted household tasks beyond her current abilities. "I've been taking care of myself and others my whole life," she told Dr. Rivera during a home visit. "Don't know how to be the one needing care." "Recovery requires a different kind of strength," the doctor replied. "Allowing help now means greater independence later." Gradually, small breakthroughs occurred. Elaine began participating in meal planning with Sarah, offering recipes and techniques from her own experience. She continued her consulting work with the community initiative, conducting phone meetings from her suite, and providing written feedback on proposals. Most significantly, she started sharing stories with Michael about his mother's childhood. Positive memories preserved alongside the difficult ones, creating a more complete family narrative. As Christmas Eve arrived, the Wilsons maintained their tradition of hosting a small gathering for close friends and neighbors. After careful consultation with Elaine, they extended the celebration to include the in-law suite, arranging seating to accommodate oxygen equipment and ensuring manageable noise levels. During this gathering, Michael presented James and Sarah with carefully wrapped gifts, handmade bookmarks he had created in art class, each personalized with colors and patterns he had observed them preferring. "Thank you for helping me and Grandma," he said formally, the simple statement carrying emotional depth beyond his years. Later that evening, as guests departed and holiday quiet settled over the house, James found Elaine sitting alone in her suite, watching through the window as snow began to fall. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, setting a cup of tea beside her. Elaine gestured toward the main house where Michael's laughter could be heard, as he and Emma attempted to teach the family dog a new trick. "Been so focused on keeping him safe, keeping us together," she said softly. "Sometimes forgot to let him be a child." The observation, honest and poignant, reflected the journey they had all undertaken, building bridges between crisis and stability, between survival and living, between isolated struggle and connected community. The interior of the foster home told a story of pride battling against poverty. Despite the obvious disrepair, there was cleanliness and order, surfaces wiped clean, the few belongings neatly arranged, a vase of wildflowers on the small kitchen table. James noted these details with respect, recognizing the dignity being maintained against overwhelming odds. Elaine Foster sat in her armchair, oxygen tubes in place, her thin frame tense with protective vigilance as Michael introduced their visitor. Her eyes, the same deep brown as her grandson's, evaluated James with undisguised suspicion. "Mr. Wilson owns the furniture store downtown," Michael explained, standing close to his grandmother's side. "He gave me these." He pointed to his new sneakers, pride momentarily overcoming his usual reserve. "That's very generous," Elaine said, her voice strained both from illness and wariness. but we don't accept charity. James had anticipated this response. In his years of business, he'd encountered many forms of pride, including the fierce kind that came from people fighting to maintain self-respect when everything else had been stripped away. "Ma'am, I completely understand," he replied, remaining standing until she gestured to a chair. "I'd feel the same way, but I'd like to explain, if I may." Elaine nodded curtly, one hand protectively touching Michael's arm. "I have a daughter about Michael's age," James began. "When I saw him walking to school without shoes, I couldn't help thinking what I'd want someone to do if my Emma was in that situation." He continued, carefully explaining how he'd noticed Michael several days in a row, the decision to stop, and the simple desire to help a child in his community. As he spoke, he maintained eye contact with Elaine, acknowledging her authority and position as Michael's guardian. "Michael's an impressive young man," he concluded. "Smart, polite, responsible. You've done an amazing job raising him." Some of the tension eased from Elaine's posture at the genuine compliment to her grandson. "He's a good boy," she agreed, a flash of pride momentarily overcoming her suspicion. "Always has been, even with everything." She trailed off, unwilling to detail their hardships to a stranger. "Grandma's sick," Michael said simply, filling the silence. "That's why we don't have much money. All her checks go to medicine." The blunt assessment from a 7-year-old struck James like a physical blow. No child should have to understand financial hardship so intimately, yet Michael spoke with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who had never known anything different. Elaine's face flushed with embarrassment. "Michael, that's not—" "It's okay," James interrupted gently. "My mother had COPD too. I recognize the equipment." He gestured to the oxygen concentrator. "It's expensive, even with insurance." This point of connection, the shared understanding of a debilitating illness, shifted the atmosphere subtly. Elaine's defensive posture relaxed slightly as she studied James with new consideration. "May I ask, Mrs. Foster, are you receiving all the benefits you're entitled to? Medicaid, Social Security, disability, the prescription assistance program?" Elaine's hesitation told him everything. "We get my Social Security," she finally admitted. "The rest, the paperwork is complicated and the transportation to appointments." She gestured vaguely at her oxygen tank. The explanation clear. James nodded, understanding. "My wife Sarah works part-time at the Community Support Center. She helps people navigate exactly these systems. With your permission, she'd be happy to look into what additional help might be available." Again, he saw the battle between necessity and pride in Elaine's expression. Michael watched his grandmother intently, unusually still, as if understanding the significance of this moment. "I'm not looking for handouts," Elaine finally said. "I worked my whole life until I got sick." "This isn't handouts," James replied, carefully. "These are programs your tax dollars supported when you were working. You're entitled to them now that you need help." This reframing seemed to reach her. After a long moment, she gave a single nod. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to get some information." Michael's small body relaxed at his grandmother's acceptance, and James realized how attuned the boy was to his guardian's emotions. Another responsibility no child should have to bear. The conversation shifted to practical matters. James offered to continue giving Michael rides to and from school, explaining that it was genuinely on his way. Elaine agreed, with the condition that Michael call her from school each morning upon arrival, a stipulation James heartily supported. Before leaving, James asked to use the bathroom, a request that made Elaine tense again, but she directed him down the short hallway. Inside the small bathroom, he discreetly noted the leaking faucet, cracked tiles, and mold growing in the corners from poor ventilation. The medicine cabinet door hung from a single hinge, and the ancient water heater in the corner made ominous sounds. Returning to the living room, James exchanged phone numbers with Elaine, promising that Sarah would call the next day about assistance programs. As he prepared to leave, Michael walked him to the door. "Thank you for the shoes," the boy said quietly. "My feet don't hurt anymore." The simple statement, delivered with solemn gratitude, cemented James's resolve to help this family in whatever way he could. The following morning began a new routine. James arrived precisely at 7:30. Michael was waiting at the designated spot, and they drove to school together. Their conversations remained brief, but gradually grew more comfortable, with Michael occasionally volunteering information about school projects or books he was reading. True to his word, James's wife Sarah contacted Elaine, beginning the painstaking process of connecting the Fosters with resources they desperately needed but had been unable to access. With her experience navigating bureaucratic systems, Sarah helped complete applications for additional benefits, arranged transportation to medical appointments, and found a prescription assistance program that reduced Elaine's medication costs by nearly 60%. 2 weeks into this new arrangement, James arrived one morning to find Michael waiting with an envelope. "Grandma made this for you and Mrs. Wilson," he explained, handing over a carefully written thank you note. Inside the envelope, James found a simple card expressing Elaine's gratitude for their help. What caught his attention, however, was the small family photo included, a much younger Elaine holding a toddler-aged Michael, both smiling at the camera. It was a glimpse into happier times before illness and poverty had taken their toll, and its inclusion represented a significant extension of trust. That evening, James and Sarah discussed the Foster situation over dinner, joined by their teenage daughter, Emma. "The bathroom is barely functional," James explained. "The whole house needs work: insulation, plumbing, electrical. I'm not sure how they made it through last winter." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The social worker I spoke with mentioned concerns about the home's condition, but Elaine's so afraid of losing Michael that she won't let official inspectors in." "Can't we just fix it for them?" Emma asked with the straightforward logic of youth. James and Sarah exchanged glances. "It's complicated, honey," Sarah explained. "We have to respect their dignity and independence. Offering too much too quickly might feel overwhelming or create uncomfortable obligations. But we can't just leave them in a house that's falling apart," James added. "It's about finding the right balance." Finding that balance would prove to be the challenge that defined their growing involvement with the Foster family. How to provide meaningful help without overstepping boundaries, how to offer support without undermining pride, and how to address immediate needs while building sustainable solutions. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising to the lives that had become so deeply intertwined. The Foster house on Oakwood Lane had been sold, the proceeds placed in a trust for Michael's education. After 18 months in the Wilsons' in-law suite, Elaine and Michael had moved to a small, accessible apartment in a new senior-friendly complex developed through the Riverdale Community Initiative. The building featured backup generators, transportation services, and community spaces where Elaine now led a support group for grandparents raising grandchildren. Michael, now 12, had blossomed academically and socially. The advanced program had challenged and engaged him, leading to accelerated math classes and participation in regional science competitions. Though still serious by nature, he had developed a quiet confidence and even occasional flashes of mischievous humor that delighted those who had known him during the darker days. The most profound changes, however, weren't in living arrangements or academic achievements, but in the relationships that had formed. What had begun as emergency assistance had evolved into a chosen family structure, not replacing biological bonds, but expanding them into a network of care and connection that defied simple categorization. "Ready for the big reveal?" James asked, pulling into the parking lot of Wilson's Furniture on a warm September morning. Michael nodded, excitement visible beneath his typical reserve. Today marked the official launch of a project that had occupied much of his free time over the past 6 months, a student-led initiative born from his own experience and developed with support from both the Wilsons and the Community Foundation. Inside the store, a special section had been arranged near the entrance. Displays featured backpacks containing school supplies, winter clothing organized by size, and informational materials about educational resources. Most significantly, each display included a discreet card with a simple message: "Take what you need, no questions asked." Supply stations are ready at the other locations too, Sarah reported, checking her phone. Hardware store, bakery, community center, and all 5 schools. Michael surveyed the arrangement with a critical eye, making small adjustments to ensure maximum accessibility and minimum visibility for those who might feel uncomfortable taking needed items. This balance, providing resources while protecting dignity, had been his primary concern throughout the planning process. "What do you think, Grandma?" he asked, turning to Elaine, who sat nearby, her oxygen equipment now more compact but still essential. "I think it's perfect," she replied, pride evident in her voice. "Anonymous but accessible. Exactly what we needed back then." The Riverdale Student Support Project represented something remarkable, a program designed by a child who had experienced a need implemented through businesses that had once been oblivious to community poverty and funded by a foundation born from one man noticing a barefoot boy on his way to work. As community members began arriving for the official launch event, Michael grew quieter, his discomfort with attention reasserting itself. Emma, now 18 and preparing for college, noticed his withdrawal and skillfully redirected focus, stepping forward to handle introductions while Michael moved to a less conspicuous position. Principal Mercer, who had supported the project from its inception, addressed the gathered crowd. This initiative reminds us that sometimes the most powerful solutions come from those who have experienced the problems firsthand. What began with one student identifying a need has expanded into a comprehensive support system that will help countless children access education with dignity. The speech continued, acknowledging contributors and explaining implementation details, but Michael had stopped listening. His attention had fixed on something at the store entrance, a woman hesitantly approaching with a small boy beside her. The child, about 7 years old, wore clothes too large for his thin frame and no shoes. Despite the morning chill, without conscious thought, Michael moved toward them, recognition of a familiar struggle overcoming his usual reserve. "Hi," he said simply, addressing the boy at eye level. "We have some cool stuff over here you might like." The mother tensed, protective wariness evident in her posture. The same caution Michael had seen countless times in his grandmother during those early days. "We're just looking," she said quickly. Michael nodded, respecting the boundary while offering a path forward. "There's no sign-up or anything. It's just stuff for students who might need it." He gestured toward the displays. "I helped design it. Because I used to walk to school without shoes, too." The simple honesty of this statement, delivered without pity or condescension, created a momentary connection. The boy looked up at his mother, then back at Michael, something like recognition passing between them. "You can try some shoes on over here if you want," Michael continued casually. "I recommend the blue ones. They're super comfortable." As he guided them toward the display, James watched from across the room, emotion tightening his throat. The image before him, Michael gently helping the boy find correctly sized shoes while chatting about school and sports, represented everything they had hoped for when establishing the foundation. Not just resources distributed, but genuine understanding offered from someone who had walked the same difficult path. Later, as the event wound down and volunteers began cleaning up, James found Michael sitting quietly in the store's break room, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" James asked, using the familiar phrase that had become their ritual over the years. Michael looked up, his expression thoughtful. "I was just thinking about that day you stopped your car. How different everything would be if you hadn't." James sat beside him, considering the observation. "Life hinges on small moments sometimes, but I think about it differently. I wonder how many cars drove past before mine, how many people didn't stop, It makes me think about all the kids we might still be missing. Michael nodded slowly. That's why the project matters, because not everyone gets someone who stops. The wisdom in this statement, the ability to transform personal experience into broader understanding, reflected Michael's journey from a child in crisis to a young person with agency and purpose. He had not only survived his circumstances, but had developed the capacity to help others navigate similar challenges. As they prepared to leave, Emma joined them, followed by Sarah and Elaine. Together, they represented an unconventional but unquestionably real family bound not by biology but by choice, commitment, and shared experience. Outside, the September sunshine illuminated Main Street where 5 years earlier, a barefoot boy had walked unnoticed by countless passing cars. Now that same stretch of road featured small blue signs directing people to student support stations throughout town, visible reminders of a community that had learned to truly see its most vulnerable members. Michael paused on the sidewalk. New sneakers comfortable on feet that no longer bore the scars of those difficult journeys. Behind him stood the adults who had, in various ways, helped create a path forward. James, who had first stopped his car. Sarah, who had helped navigate complex systems. Elaine, who had fought to keep him despite overwhelming obstacles. Emma, who had offered straightforward friendship when he most needed it. Ahead of him stretched a future far different from what might have been. Educational opportunities, stable support, the confidence that comes from knowing one belongs somewhere and to someone. But perhaps most significant was the knowledge that he had transformed his own painful experience into something that would help other children walk an easier path. "Ready to go?" James asked, keys in hand. Michael nodded, falling into step with his expanded family. "Ready." As they walked together toward the parking lot, a small boy emerged from Wilson's Furniture, proudly wearing new blue sneakers, his mother carrying a backpack filled with school supplies. He spotted Michael and waved. Shyly, one journey beginning as another continued, the invisible threads of community and care connecting them all.